When I'm out walking around, I often wonder about the lives of people I encounter while they're on the job. What made them want to have that job in the first place? Is it hard? Do they see themselves doing that forever? From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. My natural curiosity about such things is one of the reasons I became a journalist. And we know from the very fact that you listen to OPB that you are a curious person too. So we created our At Work With series, where we ask Pacific Northwesterners with interesting jobs your questions about what it's like to do what they do. And we're back with another episode highlighting 3 more Oregonians at work. First up, the art of burlesque has a long history on stage in the Pacific Northwest, and today burlesque performers are keeping the tradition alive. We learn more about the risque art form from a longtime performer who also teaches burlesque dance to others. It's Friday night, and the crowd's here for a show at Northeast Portland's Alberta Rose Theater.
Good evening, and welcome to the Oregon Burlesque Festival. We invite you to make your way to your seats as the show is about to begin.
One of the dancers on tonight's bill has been performing burlesque for almost 15 years. She also teaches burlesque and other dance at her Portland studio, Body Magic Temple.
I'm Eva Delicious. I am the Body Magic Temple High Priestess of Tease. And what I do is help people step into their confidence through dance.
In the green room of the Alberta Rose, Eva Delicious, for this story she's going by her stage name, gave me a quick primer on burlesque as she did her hair and makeup.
It's an art form that invites people to celebrate themselves, their bodies, their expression in a lot of different ways, usually through dance and movement, very often through striptease and peeling. A lot of times there's humor or there's sauciness that we're bringing into it.
Burlesque as a form of comedy has been around for centuries. It caught on in the U.S. in the 1860s and evolved into body variety shows, increasingly focused on striptease. In Oregon, Portland's Star Theater was once a world-renowned burlesque venue in the 40s and 50s. One of our listeners wanted to know, how is burlesque different from dancing at a strip club? Is it just about how nude a person gets, or is there something else? Eva says burlesque dancers are generally on stage only, while dancers at strip clubs make money offering private dances between stage shows. But
stripping, as we know it now, comes from burlesque. When you used to go to a strip club, it was basically like a burlesque show. Fancy costumes and props, and people would do 20-minute acts and things like that. We're kind of like cousins.
As for nudity, it varies from place to place, but some undressing is involved, though you wouldn't guess it from watching the movie Burlesque with Cher and Christina Aguilera.
What is this place, a strip club?
Strip club? Honey, I should wash your mouth out with Jägermeister.
We would all love revolving stages and fancy costumes and all of that, but like the whole way they presented it, all of us are like, oh, there's no way you're making money.
There are certainly some fancy costumes in real-life burlesque, though.
And this one, I'll show you this one because this is one.
At Eva's dance studio, we peruse her costume rack.
This one, actually, yeah, exactly. The rhinestoning just got completed.
Displayed around us are feather fans and boas, bedazzled headpieces, props, and some of Eva's childhood dance memorabilia.
So there's my mom putting makeup on me from an old newspaper article from our dance recital, and some photos of those costumes. Yeah, me looking very proud at age 3 and 4.
A lifelong dancer, Eva was introduced to burlesque in the 90s while living in San Francisco. A few years later, after the birth of her second son, she attended one of the first ever burlesque festivals. She loved how smart the humor was and how much fun everyone was having on stage.
Up there, owning it. Just doing their thing and having a great time and getting to tell the story that they wanted to tell.
She was inspired to try out some classes herself and had a blast. So she started performing while raising her kids, and she loved it.
I was having a great time doing it. And I thought, oh, maybe at some point I would do my own show or I would teach, because it felt like such a gift that I had been given. It sort of felt like my responsibility to pass it on.
At her dance studio in Portland, Eva and her fellow high priestesses offer burlesque lessons for dancers of all levels, in person and online. Burlesque 101 covers the basics of putting together a solo act.
How do you do your hair? How do you do your makeup? How do you pick your costume? How do you find music? How do you map your music so you can sort out choreography? We teach them some moves, and then also, how to find what's in themselves.
Eva says students often come to her at a time of change in their lives.
They've maybe gotten divorced or are coming into themselves more fully. Their kids have left the house, or they just want to know who they are in more of a sensual, physical way.
Eva wants to provide her students with a safe place to explore being more visible.
Our world isn't always kind. When you're yourself out there, you can really get tamped down. And so this is a place where we get over that. We celebrate you being you, whoever you are. And all of the work that we do, the training that we do, is to help people express themselves.
Maybe you're wondering if burlesque is for you. One of our listeners asked, what advice would you give to someone wanting to get into burlesque? Eva says, first of all, you can totally do it. And second of all, go check out some burlesque shows and explore what's out there.
You'll see so much variety. Might see someone who's like, oh, maybe that's kind of like me. We have students in their 80s who are on stage. So there's a variety of people who are out there.
Please give it up for Ava Delicious.
And when people are like, oh, I'm too old or it's too late, and I'm like, well, you're not dead. That's when it's too late, friend.
From the glitz and glam of burlesque to the daily life of a private eye. From Sherlock Holmes to Veronica Mars, this profession seems pretty glamorous too in TV shows and movies. It's a world of trench coats, dimly lit offices, and adrenaline-filled chases. Well, my colleague and fellow OPB host Lillian Kerbeek investigates for our At Work With series and says for the roughly 900 Oregonians who are licensed private investigators, it's not always quite that exciting.
There's a lot of boring stuff, that happens where you're just driving over there to see what's going on, or you're, calling people up that don't answer the phone.
That's Taya Godfrey, a private investigator and process server based in Milwaukee. She says unlike Sherlock Holmes, she's not usually running from the hounds of Baskerville in her line of work.
I don't usually get my adrenaline pumping too much in this job anymore. I make a point to be safe at all times.
And Godfrey, a 6-foot-tall, 59-year-old former paralegal, doesn't have the typical background for a PI. She switched from the endless paperwork of being a paralegal into private investigator fieldwork a few years ago.
It is really fun, and I wish I had done this sooner. It's kind of like going on a treasure hunt, sometimes where you're like, okay, this is the mission, and I need to go and figure it out. And some of the best tools you have to do this job are your curiosity and your tenacities.
Godfrey lets me follow along on today's treasure hunt. We're looking to find someone who doesn't have a permanent address to serve them with a restraining order.
So this is a guy who is couch surfing. The one address we have for him seemed to be abandoned. I went last night. It looks totally overgrown. But we have the name and address of a potential friend/employer.
The search starts in Godfrey's home office. As a licensed PI, Godfrey has access to special databases to try to hunt people down. They're not the same databases police have access to, though.
You have to go through a vetting process. You have to be a licensed investigator. You have to have somebody come out and inspect your office and make sure that it's secure and that, not just anybody can hop on and use your login.
private investigators can work on many different types of cases. There are even maritime private investigators who specifically investigate crimes that happen on the high seas. One of the greatest needs in Oregon right now are criminal defense PIs who work for lawyers.
On the defense side, you have the attorney who needs an investigator to go and double check all of these things and make sure that things were done properly. A lot of times they weren't, So you're trying to really not just interview the client who is the defendant in the case, but interview the witnesses if there are any, try and find surveillance video if they're, did we get all of the body cam footage from the police?
Godfrey mainly handles civil litigation cases like personal injury and family law rather than criminal.
It's my job to go out and interview the witnesses and actually look at the location, figure out, all the different things that might have impacted it, like what kind of weather was it.
Godfrey warns that if you need to hire an investigator, it's crucial to act quickly.
Because the evidence deteriorates or disappears altogether. I will get a request to interview witnesses on an accident that happened almost a year ago. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, but there's not going to be any video. Even if there is video that was pointing in that direction, it's not going to be there anymore.
Godfrey is up for tough cases, but she isn't a fan of cases investigating cheating spouses. In fact, she tries to talk people out of hiring any PI.
Because the first question is, okay, once you find out, what are you going to do? So are you going to go to counseling? Are you going to, maybe you should just start with counseling. I'm happy to do surveillance on people who are maybe abusing children or insurance fraud, stuff like that. But I feel like if you think that your spouse is cheating, you're probably right. Please don't spend $5,000 on surveillance. Take that money and go on vacation. Get a divorce.
Once Godfrey has done some investigation for addresses on her home office computer, we head out. First, we have to stop by the bank so she can get a chunky stack of processed server paper notarized. Then we head into Portland to look for the last known address. While we drive, I ask her some questions from listeners.
What kind of person would be good at your job?
Anybody who is not afraid to talk to strangers. The things that you really need are curiosity and tenacity, and maybe some computer and tech skills.
For decades, the typical private investigator was a retired police detective who opened up their own shop. But Godfrey says nowadays it's become more common for people from different fields, like her paralegal background, to get licensed as PIs. And national statistics show that about 43% of private investigators in 2023 were women. That wasn't always the case. 2 decades earlier, men outnumbered women in the field 2-1. Godfrey says that sometimes being a, quote, woman of a certain age is to her advantage in this job.
I had to serve a gentleman who owns a couple of THC establishments, and he was never home. He was always somewhere. And the way that I found him was by going to one of the stores and, pretending that I knew him and talking to the person behind the counter, and they told me all kinds of stuff about him. Because I was just like, oh, is so-and-so here? I wanted to say hi, And yeah, people will tell me all kinds of things. It's great.
Back in the car, we arrive at the address to try to serve a restraining or protective order on today's target. It's a small house on a side street in Northeast Portland, and Godfrey knocks for about 4 minutes straight at the door.
The lady who answered the door finally, after I knocked, I knew I could hear somebody in there. So that's the thing is, if I can hear somebody moving around in there, I'm just going to keep knocking until they're like, all right, okay.
The person who answered turned out to be the ex-wife of today's target. So this address is a dead end. Godfrey needs to do some more sleuthing. But such challenges are part of why Taya Godfrey finds her work rewarding.
I didn't think I would ever specialize in being like the person who could do hard to serves, like me. But like I said, you have to be curious and tenacious, and you just follow every lead, and don't be afraid to call people and email them, bug the crap out of them. The best part of my job is when I actually get to help somebody who really, really needs help, like with a protective order or, getting a client served where nobody else has been able to get them served. Like I'm like the third or fourth person they've tried, and I get them,
From behind a hedge in Northeast Portland, this is Lillian Kerbake for OPB.
I've hidden behind hedges. I have hidden
But
behind
you're 6 feet tall.
cars.
How are you hiding behind hedges?
Hey, these laurel hedges can be like 20 feet tall, right?
Coming up after a break, what it's like to serve as a court-appointed special advocate. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you dig what you hear, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we'll brighten your Monday morning just a little bit with something new and exciting to listen to each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo to see video dispatches from our Outwork With series and much, much more. And remember, the Outwork With series and all the great OPB reporting and storytelling you hear on this show every week is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. We get suggestions for which jobs to explore next from you, and we get funding to get out there and do it from you too. That is the beauty of public media, my friends. Support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to the show. For our last story, we're going to learn what it's like to be a CASA volunteer. That's a court-appointed special advocate. When kids are taken from their parents by the state, they enter the complicated labyrinth of the family court system. CASA volunteers get to know the children and provide reports and testimony to the judge in their case. We'll hear again from OPB's Lillian Kerbake. She got to know one of the volunteers.
Almost anyone who's involved in the Oregon foster care system will say it's overburdened.
I think it's fair to say that the system is underfunded and understaffed, and people do the best with what they are given. That's sort of where we come in.
That's Dave Anderson. He's part of the WE, Court-Appointed Special Advocates, or CASAs. CASA is not the same as being a mentor or a social worker. They're trained volunteers who represent the best interest of children who have been removed from their parents by the state. But wait, shouldn't every adult involved in a case be working for the best interest of the children?
These children all have lawyers. And I was like, well, why, if they have a lawyer, why do they need another advocate? The lawyers advocate for what the child wants. We are supposed to advocate for what we think is in the best interest of the child. And sometimes those aren't the same thing. And that can be a little bit tricky with a child, especially like a teenager, who thinks they know everything.
Anderson is a retired journalist who started volunteering as a CASA 11 years ago. Anderson said CASAs are an important part of making sure that children don't get lost in the overtaxed Oregon DHS system. As volunteers, they can focus.
Giving it 100% to those kids.
So what exactly does 100% look like? Generally, CASAs work with one kid or siblings at a time, and they'll stay working with that child until they've been placed in a safe, permanent home, which can take a few years. They'll volunteer between 2 and 10 hours a week. When they've been assigned a new case, they have to get up to speed quickly.
Well, there's a steep learning curve in every case to start out with. You want to talk to the children. You want to talk to the parents, the lawyers, if there's any therapists, teachers, doctors. Sometimes you'll be handed a file that's inches thick.
But it's not all reading. Anderson says getting to know the children and building trust is the most important part of the work. Sometimes children might have complicated or difficult needs, but often what they ask for is surprisingly simple.
Play basketball.
Anderson, who is a rare male CASA volunteer, gets mostly assigned boys. Play basketball or chess is a standard request from the children he works with.
It's hard to develop some rapport sometimes with teenagers, but you just have to approach them on their terms. We are required at a minimum to go and see the children once every 30 days to make sure they're healthy, not being abused, either emotionally or physically, that everything is, going okay. I might try to go more often than that, but a typical visit is just going, seeing the kids, chatting with them, playing basketball for half an hour, and then playing chess for half an hour. and then, talking with them a little bit.
Building that relationship with the kid looks different for every case. Anderson was assigned a 15-year-old boy who was being hoteled, placed in a hotel with a social worker because there weren't enough foster families on Hayden Island, which is a pretty tough living situation.
So it was almost like he was surrounded by a moat and being held, and there's a Burger King, I think, across the street. This kid was not terribly easy to work with. And so I was nervous, and I knew he was going to try to put up a front or whatever. So we went across the street. I bought him lunch. We're sitting there. I get my grilled chicken sandwich, and I go to eat it, and I bite into it, and the chicken patty slides out of the sandwich and onto the floor. I say a bad word. He starts laughing hysterically. I pick up the chicken patty, I sort of half-heartedly wipe it off, and then I eat it. And that built so much credibility. He was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you just did that. And after that, we had a great relationship.
It's not always laughter, though. The work is often tough, sometimes heartbreaking. But Anderson gets to be a voice for the children who can't speak for themselves.
That's a key part of the job, is reporting to the court. And I'm not beholden to anybody in that courtroom except the children. That's my sole focus. And so judges, I found, are very, very appreciative of the work that we do. They almost take what we say more seriously than what any other of the parties in the courtroom say.
A listener asked if Anderson feels able to push back on the state's recommendations as a volunteer. Doing so was actually one of his proudest cases as a CASA.
The mom had several chances and just could not kick drugs. She was found living in a box in a Safeway parking lot with her son. And he was removed from her. Again, he was 2 years old and sick at the time. So it didn't look good. And she had a couple chances at rehab that didn't work. And I got to talk to her and got to know her pretty well. And the state wanted to change the plan to adoption or guardianship and remove her parental rights. And I said, no, let's give this one more chance. And the mom and the child were placed in a specific program that was designed for moms with young children who were addicted to drugs. And that worked. And that was one of the most gratifying cases that I've worked on, because the state was ready to give up on mom. And I was like, no, I can feel that she really loves him, that there's a spark there, that, she wants this to work. And thank goodness it did.
There's huge systemic issues in foster care bureaucracy, and the hard work of CASAs isn't going to fix an overall broken system. But Anderson says the frustration is worth it when he can make a real difference in a child's life, a small contribution to making the world better.
You step back and you sometimes, think about what they're going through, and that's really rough. But you are helping bring a little joy to their lives. And in the long term, you are hopefully bringing the foundation, the stability that they need to truly, be happy and fulfill their potential.
He said there's no perfect volunteer except
anybody who has an interest in helping kids. Everybody brings their own skill set.
As rewarding as the work is, Anderson is careful to manage his expectations. He doesn't dwell too long on past cases.
I'm curious about how some of my kiddos have, turned out and where they are and how they're doing, but there's always the next case, and that's where you put your energies and focus on what you can do.
You can find a link to our At Work With series in the show notes. And check out our social media videos with folks you heard in this episode. We'll also link to those in our show notes. Also, please send us suggestions for who you would like to hear from. Is there a job you've always been curious about? Or a specific person who you think might be fun for us to hear from? Go to our website, opb.org/theevergreen, and let us know. Thank you for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. If you're here listening right now, you are part of our podcast family. And we want to shout out one of our lovely listeners who recently left us a kind comment about our show online. At Sieta666 on YouTube left a comment about our episode on Marie Equi, the woman who became the namesake for Portland's only lesbian bar. They say, quote, I got to study her for an undergrad assignment nearly a decade ago. What an absolutely fascinating woman. And having her as part of our history makes me a bit prouder to be an Oregonian. Well, thank you so much for sharing that at Sieta666, and as always, I am so happy to hear from y'all. You can help us grow, by the way, by leaving a review, perhaps just like this one, on your favorite podcast app, including YouTube. Follow us there, and hey, tell your friends. Mia Estrada produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. He also engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Julie Sabatier and Sage Van Wing. Lillian Kerbake and yours truly did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And if you have a question for us, don't forget that you can reach out. You can email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.